So I've never heard a government-funded disinformation or misinformation expert ever fact-check a government source, though, and that tells you everything you need to know. The fact-checkers only check facts one way, and much of the time when they say they're checking facts, they're actually checking opinions. Nonetheless, I want to bring to your attention a study that I saw today. It was actually highlighted by one of my favorite independent news sources called Blacklock's. It's a study published by the Canadian Digital Media Research Network. Doesn't that sound fancy and authoritative, as if that's even a thing? Well, they have something they publish called a situation report. Canadian Information Ecosystem Situation Report. Technical briefing on the state of the information ecosystem. And you can see on the screen their May report. Of course, all of that is BS. They have the dramatic language situation report as if it's like a military briefing, as if there's some true scholarship underneath it. They do that, I think, because that's how they get funding. They know the buzzwords to say when they write to bureaucrats looking for huge grants. And just as 5-10 years ago, you could get any money you wanted just by parroting a global warming or climate change line. And now you can do so when you talk about transgenderism or Islamophobia. You'll just back up the dump truck and fill up with taxpayer cash. The new hot area of scholarship is misinformation and disinformation. And so universities, whose main job, as you can tell, is raising funds. That's why they bring in so many foreign students. They charge them a premium and make a profit. It's not about scholarship. University presidents that are always hunting for cash have realized that if they set up these disinformation observatories, they'll get cash, especially if they study Trudeau's enemies, which brings me to the latest report of the situation report. Let me point out right on the front page, key findings. Ecosystem influence is highly concentrated in a number of voices. Do you think that's true? Do you think that online, where everyone has a Facebook account, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, TikTok, whatever you're on, do you really think the voices are more concentrated now than ever? Or do you actually think, as I do, that opinions are more diffuse than ever? In the past, we only had CTV, Global, and CBC, and we all had to tune in at the same time. We couldn't seek our own news. I think there's more news choices now than ever in history. It's just that so many of those that are out there don't happen to toe the line of the government. I'll keep reading. The Canadian Information Ecosystem, could you imagine using that language with a straight face? That's how you get grants, folks. Remains highly unequal. Is that what you say? Unequal? Are you talking about the CBC getting all the money? No, they're talking about people like you and me. With a small number of accounts receiving a supermajority of engagement. Is that really true? That a handful of accounts get more engagement than the rest of people combined? That's what supermajority means. Or again, are they just using these buzzwords to get grants? This inequality remains even more extreme for media outlets, with the top 5 media organizations, CTV, Global News, CBC, The Post-Millennial, and Rebel News, receiving approximately 65% of all news engagement across social media platforms. Is that true? I mean, I like to boast about Rebel News. It's sort of my job. But are we really that big? I mean, I'd like to think we are. But come on, most Canadians actually haven't even heard of us. I don't know if you remember, we took a poll a couple of years ago. Now, half of Canadians had heard of us. But to say that we're one of the top 5 dominant sources, listen, I want to believe it. But these folks have a purpose. A purpose is to scare the government into A, passing censorship laws, and B, most importantly, giving them more money. I'll continue. They say misinformation producing websites receive significant attention. While overall volume of misinformation content in the ecosystem is low, there's high engagement with content linking to known misinformation producing websites. Hey, does it count as misinformation when, for example, the CBC state broadcaster talks at length about how vaccines are 100% safe? They used to say that. Safe and effective. They used to say that too. Is that ever considered misinformation? Or is only things that criticize the government considered misinformation? I want to flip ahead to the part where they focus on Rebel News, because, of course, in some ways, I'm flattered that someone is earning millions of dollars to invest, to watch Rebel News for a living. Wouldn't that be nice? They talk about their findings as if this was some sort of investigation. Engagement with Canadian news outlets is more unequal than the overall ecosystem, with a Gini coefficient of 0.955. That's a mathematical statistics formula. We find the top 5 Canadian outlets that attract the most engagement are CTV, Global News, CBC, The Post Millennial, and Rebel News. Well, of course I'm flattered, but I don't quite believe it. And one of the reasons I don't believe it is because they have the Post Millennial on there. Now, I like the Post Millennial just fine. Some of them are my friends for a while I was a subscriber. But about a year or two ago, they were bought by a U.S. website called Human Events. And they have maybe one full-time Canadian reporter left, but the vast majority of their work is American. And they're very good at it, by the way. I read their stuff every day. But to put that in a list of Canadian websites shows that these folks are working on some outdated enemies list. The Post Millennial was founded in Canada, for sure, and they were an ardent critic of Trudeau, for sure. But that really hasn't been the case for years. I think their office is in the States now. It shows that these academics don't really care about getting out of their office and doing investigations. They just want to pander to the biases of the grant givers, Trudeau. I'll keep reading. Collectively, they receive 64.9% of all engagement with news content. Do you believe it? Do you believe that those 5 news sites I've just listed to you have the majority of all news interactions in the country? I'm sorry, I just don't believe it. I think they're lying. I think they're engaged in misinformation. Local news outlets receive just 24.6% of all engagement with news content. Now, why do you think they might lie? Can you sort of pick it up there? Oh, these 5 companies dominate and local news coverage isn't followed. Can you see where they're going with this? I can. This is to justify giving grants to local media. That's what this is all about. But look at that chart there, just for one last moment. Top 5 Canadian news outlets. What are the top 5 Canadian news outlets? What is their share of total engagement? You can see CTV has 25.1%. Global News has 11.8%. CBC has 11.2%, which is astonishing, given that they get, $1.5 billion a year. You would think they were bigger than all else combined. 10% for the Post Millennial. And there we are, Rebel News at 6.7%. Now, again, I'm a skeptic, but just for a moment, put away your disbelief. I mean, never trust these experts, but just for a moment, accept it on face value. Rebel News right now has, I think, 41 staff, including me, 41. The CBC has thousands. The CBC budget from government money alone is $1.5 billion. It's more than 100 times bigger than Rebel News. They get 100 times more money, and they have more than 100 times more staff. They've got about 200 times as much staff. And we're 60% as large as them in terms of engagement. If that's true, and again, I don't believe a thing these guys say, if that's true, imagine how awful the government propaganda has to be that people would come to us in such numbers and avoid them in such numbers. It's maybe not astonishing that we're popular, but it's astonishing given how much money there is behind the CBC, how unpopular they are. They're still forced into every cable package in Canada. You cannot get a cable package in Canada without being forced to subscribe to and pay for the CBC. What I'm getting from this study is no one believes them. No one even pays attention to them. People are thirsty for alternative points of view, and the government and any greedy professor looking for a handout is only too happy to smear independent news as a threat.